Bonsoir. Guten Abend. It's so great to see all of us coming together to talk about architecture in the city. It's really exciting. Thank you for coming. My practice, Studio Gang, I started about 18 years ago, just all by myself in my own apartment. I really wanted to use architecture to address some of the things I care about in the world. Now my office is located in two places, New York and Chicago. There's about 100 of us now working together in a really nice community that's very collaborative and very energetic. I thought about maybe I could tell you something about myself before talking about some of the work. I grew up in the States, and really one of the things that really impacted me was my father was a civil engineer. And so when I was a kid growing up, we spent our summer vacations driving across the United States to look at bridges. Longest bridge, tallest bridge, fattest bridge, you name it, all over the United States. And so in a lot of ways I thought I might be a civil engineer or a structural engineer, but I developed a passion for the landscape in these trips. Places like the Grand Canyon, where the temperature difference between the top and the bottom creates totally different environments, different plants, different animals. And in other places like this, Mesa Verde, which is a place where human habitation interacts with natural environment. This is a place where Native Americans built their dwellings directly into the canyon walls. Very exciting. And so this love of the environment, as I also love cities as an architect like all of you, I notice how cities are providing places for us to live and succeed, but we also cities impact the environment as well. This is a photograph I took flying into my home city of Chicago, where it's a city of skyscrapers, and you can see the buildings actually literally scraping the sky. Where the buildings are, the clouds are removed. Also, many places in the States and in Europe, in this post-industrial environment, we have an impact on the landscape from cities, from our activities. Polluted waterways. This is a view outside of Chicago, a place that I find very interesting, where the hill that you see in the back is not really a hill because Chicago is very flat. It's a landfill, so you have invasive species, landfills, and things like that. So I became interested in how to bring a more biodiverse nature into the city, and how could the city evolve to be able to accommodate not only people, but also plant, animals, insects, and all the things that come together to make an environment. And I really look to ecology as an inspiration, because ecologists don't just study individual species of animals on their own. They look at the relationship between living things, between each other and the environment. So I think that's very important in our work. One of our early projects is not a building, it's actually this book, which we wrote. This book, it contains research about the history of the Chicago River. And the reason why we did the book was really to help the public understand the history of the river and where it can go in the future. It was called Reverse Effect, and that's because the Chicago River, the river in my hometown, was actually engineered to go the opposite direction. And they did it to preserve the drinking water that was coming from Lake Michigan, but a byproduct of that was that the city polluted everything downstream. And some of the impacts of this 100 years later are water quality that is very bad. You can't, get it on your skin. We have infrastructure that can't handle even a half an inch of rain causes sewer to overflow and to create flooding in basements. Then we have this problem of invasive species coming up the Mississippi, making their way toward the Great Lakes. So all these compounded problems. But I think the potential here is really that in the lower left-hand corner, this land that has become available as industry has moved on, and how to think about reinventing that land. I said that we want to make relationships between people and their environment. So one of the things that requires is talking to people. And I think it's one of the things that we architects, maybe we don't do it enough. We should learn how to do it better. But we interview people and we ask them how they're using the river today. And we found out that, in fact, they are using it. But one of the biggest barriers to their perception of the river is that it's not very welcoming. So it takes a lot of work to get to the river's edge. In fact, this is a view of Chicago River today, and you can see how it's almost impossible to get to the edge because of the private land that is inhabiting it. So in our book, we showed a vision of how it could look in the future if we were to give over more space to this river where those industrial lands are in order to clean the water and to return it back to Lake Michigan instead of flushing it down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so as architects, we thought we have to show how to do this. We showed 10 steps, like maybe it takes 20 years, but these are the 10 steps that we need to do. And we diagram these in the book. But the number one step that I think is interesting is that we said give people access to the water and acquire the land, give access. And in doing so, we learned that people will start to care about this waterway and start to preserve it, start to enhance it. It was a small part of the book, but what happened later in Chicago was we got a new mayor in the city. And the mayor read the book and called us, to the office and said, I want to make the river, the Chicago's next recreational frontier. And so with other architects, we started to address sites along the river. And one of the first projects that we did was a boathouse, a recreational boathouse along the Chicago River. And when we finished this, which was a very fast project, it seemed that everything started to change for the Chicago River. This is a picture of the boathouse as it is today. And it was a very quick project. We had about a year and a half total to do it. And so we tapped into this aspect of rowing, how the movement of rowing can create an excitement in the architecture. So we took the position of the oars and translated that into a roof form of trusses that bring natural light in and also warming into the building, which has no heat. There's also a field house. Here's a picture during construction, and you can see we use very simple materials, not very expensive. All straight members, but using them in a way that created these warping surfaces. There's an indoor rowing tank because it gets very cold in Chicago. And this is showing this incredible regatta that's already happening now on an annual basis, opening up this waterway to the public. It's pretty exciting for me to see. The building uses some slate exterior. It's all clad. They wanted a masonry building. We decided, we talked them into doing slate and really using wood and plywood on the interior to be able to accentuate the curves, the warped surfaces that we created through the straight members. Also, the building is used for teaching rowing for kids, inner city youth, but it's also a place where veterans can go that have been handicapped or injured, and they learn to row, and it brings this kind of new quality to this relationship to the river, people relating to each other and to this environment. It's so far, the process I've described to you of my practice it doesn't sound like a normal practice, but we tried to describe it to ourselves, and we said, we're into actionable idealism because we are idealists and we want to make the world a better place, but we want to do things that get done. So another project that I think really fits into that is the Nature Boardwalk at Lincoln Park Zoo. Here, the client asked us to design a beautiful pavilion. Okay, well, we did it, but first we looked at the place, and it was like a 19th century pond, a representation of nature, with very few species represented, a pond that was dirty, a pond that was very shallow, and kind of in disrepair. So we actually talked our client into improving the pond itself and improving the water quality, making it deeper, making it a place that is infrastructure and provides ecosystem services. In other words, habitat and green infrastructure. And part of doing that was ripping out the edges. You can see in this view, it's about a 40-acre site. And we've created here a place where it's very wild and biodiverse right within the city. So it's been completed for a few years now, and they started using it. The Urban Wildlife Institute started to use this pond for testing and to use it for scientific purposes of seeing what kind of species could actually come through the city, the middle of the city. There's many different species, and they're using a lot of different scientific techniques, mappings. The one on the left is looking at turtles. The one on the right is a site that we use called eBird, which is to record the number of species that are there. You can see that 183 different avian species have already been seen. And what was really interesting is that there was a few of these, a rookery of black-crowned night herons using the space. They went from being 40 pair to 400 pair over 3 years. We also saw with the night cameras skunks and even coyotes. There's like 2,000 coyotes evidently living in the city of Chicago. So I got really interested in, how close can we bring the human city dwellers and the urban animals, and to create this more biodiverse area. The pavilion itself, the crowning jewel, I guess, is made out of wood, bent wood lamellas that are bent in two directions, and then these fiberglass pods that close the space. And the idea of the pavilion is really to use it for education, but people started using it in different ways. And I think the lesson for me for this project is really that it really does begin to create these relationships between people and their environment. You can see people using it in kind of ordinary ways, like hanging out and playing with kids. It's very interactive. Dance company use this space for performance. There's a weekly, I don't know how often, yoga class there, which just showed up. And then all of these couples started going there to get their picture taken for their weddings, and especially architects, I think. But it's like the most popular place to get married and to get wedding photos in the city. So that's a relationship, right? One of the most interesting things that happened was they started to use the space for the dîner en blanc out of the blue, and took up the entire boardwalk for that space. So because this early work is so much focused on environment and creating these relationships, one of the things that we found in our practice was that it's not only, it's great to be for the environment and to bring people together around things that you share, but really in our cities today, there's more problems than that. The problems that we're seeing and are impacting us in the States, at least, are a big increase in the polarization between people. We see that through politics, but people are becoming more and more isolated from each other, especially if they have different views. And there's also an increase in loneliness. A Harvard study recently showed that not only older people, but millennials are experiencing more loneliness and isolation in spite of the fact that we're more connected than ever. So our practice started looking at other building types and also temporary, what kind of temporary exhibitions, what kind of temporary installations we could do to help bring people together in cities. I think exhibitions are very interesting for all architects, and especially young architects, because you can, it's not a building, so it doesn't have to stand up for very long. You can learn something about materials. You can experiment. And those are the qualities and the fun quality that we try to maintain in our practice. One early exhibition that we did was this marble curtain installed in the National Building Museum, and it was sponsored by the International Masonry Institute. And they asked us to think about stone in a different way. So we found out that the floor inside the museum could not support a stone exhibition. So we automatically started thinking about how light and thin it could be. Would it be possible to hang stone in tension from the ceiling? And this exhibit, it really was the first time that the stone was used in pure tension, hanging from the ceiling of this gallery, like a chain of a puzzle. And you can see how thin the material is here. And so this project really drew people in because they were fascinated by the material use. More recently, in the National Building Museum, again, we were asked to install something in this gigantic space in the middle of the museum, the Great Hall. It's a kind of a scary, gigantic space where the acoustics are such that you cannot even hear someone if you're talking to them across from 10 feet away. We had the idea that we wanted to build something very tall in here, of like even half the height of the hall, and it would change the acoustics and make it possible for people to come together for acoustic events. We call it Hive, and the idea was to take a renewable material and construct a big dome inside the space. It was pretty ambitious doing this project and getting it done, built in 2 weeks, and installed. And it really is a structure. It has to stand up over people's heads. This is the engineering analysis. And so it required us to actually test the material, put it into compression until failure, to see if the joints would be able to withstand the weight. These are some of the mock-ups that we did. And then the final piece, where there's one large dome that you go inside, and 2 smaller ones. And the whole idea was for events to take place. So a very packed schedule for people to come together inside the dome. Yoga, okay, not all of our projects are used for yoga, but this place became like a mecca for yoga. I mean, there was no room left inside the dome. You had to go outside the dome. They also did musical concerts and demonstrations and talks inside the dome over the summer. So it was only up for 2 months. And then more recently, we were asked to design a stage for a performance in Chicago for the Chicago Architecture Biennial. And in this case, we are collaborating with the artist Nick Cave, which is not to be confused with the musician Nick Cave, but Nick Cave, the artist, creates these amazing sound suits, he calls them, and he asked us to make a stage. So here, this would draw people from all over Chicago and all over the world to see these performances and really bring people together. We were studying equilibrium, and we call these the stage buoys. And these are tests with their motion and their reaction based on, where you put the mass and the weight in there. So we created about 500 of these so that they could be used for the stage, but also they could be used by the public to get them engaged with something and to meet other people. And so this was really exciting for my studio. It was very successful. All ages used it, and they had a series of performances over the days of the Architecture Biennial. So far, I still haven't showed you really any architecture buildings except for the boathouse. So I want to just talk about how does building relationships scale up to tall buildings? Tall buildings are, I know there's lots of dialogue about doing tall buildings in Europe. In Chicago, everyone kind of likes tall buildings, but they can be a little bit isolating, and they really haven't been looked at through the lens of social activity and connectivity. The good thing about tall buildings is their small footprint. In terms of carbon footprint, if you put people into a smaller footprint, an urban footprint, you obviously are using less land, but you also are creating less of a carbon footprint per household. So, for example, on the left, the footprint of the AQUA tower compared to the footprint of the equal amount of households in a suburban setting, you can see that you have about 1/7 of the carbon footprint if you live in a compact arrangement, which doesn't always have to be in towers, but it is one of the positive benefits. The downside of towers is they can be isolating. People are only connected to the environment through a tube, through the elevator, up and down, and it's very awkward to talk to people in an elevator. So with the AQUA tower, we were really trying to think about how we could create a new way of people to connect to their environment, to the city and the building at the same time. It's 82 stories. It's apartments and condominiums and a hotel, so mixed use. And it's on this very small footprint. The idea of it was that the slabs, each floor slab, which is different, can extend from the building and create this almost like a landscape. So it really started with this idea of a topography. How could a topography be turned vertical to make hills and valleys that would allow people to see different views, specific views, outside their apartment, and to be able to step outside, even on an 82-story tower, and to be part of that environment. the benefit of these slabs being not lined up, let's say, this is a picture in the wind tunnel. The benefit is it helps to break up the wind and to make the balconies more comfortable for a longer period of time during the year. And so you can see that it's confusing the wind. And that's really important. And it also gives you the sense of other people in the building. Our client wanted us to have separate balconies with no views to outside, and we really pushed for having these open balconies with views of each other. And what we heard since the building is opened a few years ago is people started to get to know each other on the building. It's seen as one of the most social buildings, most connected socially buildings in the city. One of the things we wanted to improve on, and is after AQUA, was really like how to isolate. You want the outdoor space, but how do you isolate that outdoor balcony space from the interior space to get a better environmental performance? So in this tower, we played on the balcony idea, but created these balcony stems. The green part is a stem of balconies that rotate around, and all of the gravity loads are taken directly into the ground. And so it can be separated from the other slab, and you can see that during construction, how the inside slab and the outside slab are separated. And what it does is create this incredible threshold space that is between the inside and the outside, and a place where neighbors can't see into your apartment, but they can see each other once they step outside. And this amazing, almost Escher-esque view of the building when you look at the different balcony stems on the facade. And so it's another way of using the balcony as a social network for tall buildings. Okay, so now I want to show you a recent project that designed for the Tour Montparnasse in Paris, a competition that we recently completed and lost. But we were second place, and it was an incredible competition. It really helped me to start thinking about what it means to do a tall building in Paris, and such an important site. Many of you probably are familiar with the plazas around the Tour Montparnasse. It's a building that was part of an urban renewal project, and so there isn't much context around it, and really just the site. You can see here the plaza between the Gare Montparnasse and the tower, located between the two, is kind of blank and windswept, and there's also very wide roads surrounding all of the area. What we noticed is just the quality of this space, the plaza, and the windiness of it was one of our first observations. And when we started looking at it from a wind perspective, it turns out that those cavities in the ends of the plan are actually capturing the predominant winds and pushing them down to the plaza. So this is the reason why people feel uncomfortable in the plaza. It's the Place, it's Place Road d'Autry, and it's very windy and blank. And so it really is to do with the shape of the building. We took this into a CFD program, a fluid dynamic program, and it confirmed that this was one of the main problems of the plaza here. So the concave end scooping the wind down. So bringing some experience to this from working on tall buildings and really being interested in the wind, we proposed a solution where we would fill in the two ends of the tower, which creates a more fluid form which is better for the reducing the turbulence, and then create a series of bumps on the facade. And that's kind of a relatively new discovery in wind tunnel design. A lot of it is based on looking at forms in nature, like the tails of a whale or other forms in nature where the small bumps actually keep the wind tight to the building and break it up. At the same time, we're looking at really interesting early research by Etienne Jules Marlet, because this was an inventor, an interesting French scientist who really developed kind of like the very first wind tunnel testing in 1901. He created a machine that had 58 streams of smoke that he would pass over different forms and to see the turbulence. I actually saw these machines in an exhibition in Paris a number of years ago. And he also looked at photography and change and was really interested in motion. With these things in the background, we ended up testing a few forms in the wind tunnel. These are two shots from a wind tunnel facility that we use in Canada that helps you understand how the building impacts the environment around it. So I think we weren't just thinking about the tower on its own, we're thinking about the relationship, between the tower and the space around it. There were some other really cool challenges with this project, like, for example, carrying the weight of a new facade and where to take the columns down, how to build it quickly to reduce the disturbance on the neighbors. But these bumps you can see starting to show, and they become these bay windows, so that the new facade of the building would be made out of 1,000 belvederes. So every person inside the office, not only the bosses, would get a bay window, a belvedere over Paris, and which created this incredible, beautiful texture that is doing the work of addressing the wind, but also giving a benefit to the inside. These are some of the shots of our physical model that we made, and you can still see, if you happen to be at the Arsenal, the pavilion in Paris, where all of the models are displayed. But this texture was also really resonating with kind of the horizontality, because each level of this tower that we're creating is expressed, and so you can actually see the levels similar to the fabric of the Parisian city. Environmentally, it has a benefit too, because you can shade your window on one side and keep the view open on the other. We had this thin double skin facade with the shade inside the store. And you can see it here rolling down and leaving one side open. These lamellas could also be rotated, and they're reflective, so that the quality of the building is actually this metallic quality of the shade, not just the glass. So I think this quality is something that could be really providing a kind of monumentality, but at the same time, the scale of human intervention. People could override these shades or do what they want with them, but they would have an appearance on the facade. This is a view from Parc de Luxembourg. Structural solution was very elegant, like bringing down a whole new set of columns that attach to the existing ones so as not to touch the existing foundations. And at the bottom of the building, they flare out so that you can see these new, what we called the sister columns, flaring out and becoming a new base for the tower, with many different uses packed into the base to bring this vitality and liveliness and social quality to the space. So these are some of the views of the areas around the base that are kind of carved out to create green space and to address some of the problems of the existing place. At night, the top becomes part of the landscape of Paris. These are all the parks in Paris, with Tour Montparnasse being the highest park in the city. Up at the top, out of the core, we spring a new structure, a carole, that goes out and picks up the glass in the observatory. And to end with that, I will just show you the movie that kind of brings it all together. Maybe it got lost. Sorry. Well, you can see the movie on our website, but it's try one more time. Okay, it's there. Kind of bringing all of these ideas together into a building that can be both monumental on the scale of and the prestige of Paris, but also a human scale that can let people relate to the structure. Here's this view of the plazas that now have plants and trees and a kind of welcoming that people could really make this place their own. Common areas and social spaces for the people that are working in the building, and co-working spaces around the base that can, kind of support the new economy. Looking up, you can see the stepping that I explained about the facade, and these 1,000 belvederes that exist. Inside, that gives you these chances to make an open office, a double height office, a hotel inside, with the opportunity for amenities for the hotel. Really starting to think about mixed use and flexibility for change. At the top, we had a number of terraces there, and this garden that would be a place where you could have public events and parties, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not the end of the story. I think one of the things that we learned here was really how to create a facade that could be a living facade, and I guarantee you it's going to show up in some new work of ours at some point. Currently, another building that we are thinking about the social aspect of is the Vista Tower in Chicago. It's under construction. It's a hotel. It's apartments. But one of the most important things about it is its position in the city, located on this axis from the Field Museum, but also being part of the riverscape. So it's both a tower that takes place in the landscape, in the cityscape, but also part of the river's edge. And we started again with this kind of zoomed in scale of the module of what is this is called a frustum. And so what does it do? It allows people to have either sky views or ground views, and it gives us more corners. So this shape that's a geometric shape is doing a lot for us. It's also a form found in nature. Well, I'm just kidding, but it actually is a shape of a Toblerone. But it's a shape, it's basically a truncated pyramid. And like I said, it gives you this opportunity to get more corners. But it also does is, as you can see in this model photo, these 3 stems are where the cores of the building are. And by doing that, we are able to lift the center stem and make a public passage right below the bottom of a gigantic tall tower. And this is important because towers take up a lot of space at the base, okay? So either you can animate them with program, or in this case, provide a passage both for walking, people biking, and driving, all going underneath the central stem here because of the way that the structure works. And so it's really on 2 levels, making a strong connection to the riverscape. So we're really excited about this tower, and it's will be completed in 2020. This is about where it is right now, and it will be, part of this riverscape and part of the city at the same time. Okay, so we've talked about big buildings, making social connections. Maybe it's good to talk about the scale of community buildings that so many of us are passionate about. This building is called the AQUA Center for Social Justice Leadership, and it's a building on a college campus devoted to students who want to develop their skills in social justice. And this is the campus. It's very small, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the site where the pink dot is. This group of teachers and students were so excited about and passionate about social justice. And their campus is really kind of this architecture that it's old style, it's kind of colonial looking, and which doesn't really go very well with social justice. So we didn't, there wasn't really an example of a social justice building. I mean, it doesn't exist. And so we looked at the space where social justice happens, like usually in the street, usually outside. But we went around and looked internationally where community meeting buildings were. How do you get people to talk to each other? And we found some examples of community meeting houses that were really interesting in terms of creating relationships. Like the one on the upper left in Mali where the elders gather and they have a very low ceiling, so it's intended to keep everybody calm and cool, talking to each other without standing up, or otherwise you would hit your head. And so we created this central space where everyone could join in, and the faculty said they wanted it to be warm and welcoming, and they thought about a fireplace, and the students wanted a place to share food. And so you can see that even though it's an academic building, we were able to bring these elements into the center of the space, and in doing so, make a place where people can have small, intimate gatherings, one-on-one, facing each other, and that's what we learned from the community meeting houses. But it also transforms into a place for big events, and all 3 wings can be used for gatherings. This building was completed a couple years ago, and it's been recognized a lot. It's very connected to its environment, the woods on one side, the campus on the other, and the neighborhood beyond. Inside we used a lot of the materials were wood that were from the site, and you can see in the diagram how it's the partie is such that it relates to all these 3 different environments. We were trying to find a material for this building. What would it be made out of that's not brick or doesn't evoke the colonial architecture? And we really wanted to use wood. In Michigan, there's a type of wood called white cedar. The image on the left is the range of the white cedar, and it's very resistant to rot, and it's also renewable resource. And one day we stumbled upon this really old barn, like 100-year-old barn, that was fascinating because it used the wood as a masonry wall. So if you look closely at this wall, it's made out of cordwood, basically all the wood from a tree. So we thought, would it be possible to revive this technique for the 21st century? Who knows how to do it? How would you even convince the college to do that? But we found a couple that was building some small saunas around the world, and they came and taught us and our masons how to do it. It turns out it's a great technique for the environment because you're using all the parts of the tree, not just one part. It's extra thermal, but most importantly, it's really sequestering the carbon within the walls. So if you think about it, many of our materials, you have to heat them or burn them or cook them. But with wood, it's basically absorbing the carbon all during its life. And with this technique, there's almost no fabrication to it. It just dries out, and then you use it within the wall, and it creates this incredible texture. But it also has this very strong relationship to the hand, and it evoked this quality of building community that we wanted to have for the building. It weathers, with the weather. We've tried some experiments here with different kinds of walls. These curved walls end up being very good for this technique because it puts everything into compression on the walls. And it's very beloved building already in its use. And the people that are in the college that were starting this program have seen their program explode since the building was created. And it's supporting these relationships and supporting their mission. Here you can see it from above. And then just a couple little more small things before we end and have questions. I wanted to show you another building that I think really creates community. And it's the Writers Theater project in Glencoe, a small theater with a 250-seat venue and a 99-seat venue located north of the city of Chicago in this small village, right on Lake Michigan as well. And when we started this project, we found out that the village is very quiet at night, very, very dead, and nothing really going on. And this theater group had been operating out of the back of a bookstore in the downtown, and it was the only thing that was lively in the town. So in a way, the town needed more than a theater. And this is what I think we've learned how to do in our practice, which is to not just think of the building on its own, but think of the relationships that the building can start to create outside the boundaries of the site. Here we started with our research thinking about what is street theater? What was it? What would it be like if you had theater without a building? Looking back at early theater and Shakespearean theater, which was in the courtyards. This is kind of an in-yard theater where people could occupy the building and look into an outside space. We wanted to create something that would create a vibe, not just in the theater spaces themselves, but the only place we had left to work with was the lobby. And so what we did was create a space that would be both a civic space and a theater lobby space. And that's the space you see here. It's got 2 levels, and so the lobby is here and the venues are around it, but it also opens up to the village and to the park. And the second level of it is a walkabout, so you can see things during intermission. You can use it as an impromptu performance space. It's a kind of, the village is filled with a lot of historic buildings, and they wanted to know how our building was fitting in, and we said it's right in line with Tudor architecture, because Tudor architecture was very innovative at its time. It was a frame building when everything else was bearing walls. And we're taking that to a new level and a new technology. So again, with the tension, I've always been interested in tension as a force. And so we wanted this walkway to be hanging and very light. So the structure is some Virendale trusses with trusses over the top that then hang down these battens, very thin wood members that carry the walkway. And so it sounds simple, but none of this is allowed in the building codes, and no one believed us that it could work. We set about creating 2 rows of battens that attach to the beams, and then where it carries the walkway is a special connection that we call the cat's paw. And so working together with light engineers and craftsmen to conceive of this walkway, we were able to structure it and convince the building department that it would work, except for they asked us to show a physical test. So we found a crafts guild out in the middle of nowhere in this place in the middle of Illinois, where they were going to build this test for us. This is like 3 hours from any major city. But when we did the test and pulled this battens and beams to failure, we were really surprised that we surpassed all of the expectations. We passed the code, and even the steel frame around the structure was starting to give way before our structure was. So we were able to continue. These are some of the details of the cat's paw. You can see how wood is added in to the detail instead of taken away as a bolted connection would be. So I even got to help make some of these, and I learned some woodworking techniques. So did my team. And also we got to know this guild, and they invited us out to learn more about woodworking, etc. And I even learned how to throw an axe over there. But it was a fascinating experience that you can see the cat's paw carrying the walkway all around. And now the space is used for not only as a lobby, but kids are starting to come here after school and use it for study space. They're opening a cafe in there, and it's becoming a place to have conversations about the sometimes difficult materials that are put on in the theater. And then finally, this is kind of coming back around to the idea of actionable idealism in our practice. A project that started out theoretical called the Polis Station. So not a real project, no client, really just an idea to study something that was an issue for our city. In the States and elsewhere around the world, there is growing tension between police and community members. It's in the news every day. And we started to think about, is there a possibility for design to have something to add to this conversation? Like, why are police and community members so at odds, and why don't they get to know each other so that there can be more recognition in certain times and more chance to create trust, I guess, trust between people instead of not knowing each other. So we just took a look at what police stations look like in Chicago. And basically, they all have the same design. They're a prototype. And they did that because the city wanted to create equality and equity throughout the city. But the thing is, they didn't really achieve that because they never asked the people from the neighborhoods what they wanted their police station to be. They just built the same model everywhere. So if you look at the history of police station architecture, it's kind of interesting. It started out that there really wasn't a building at all. It was just these warming huts like you see in the background. And the police were people from the community that just took turns walking around the blocks to keep everyone safe. So they knew everyone, and they talked to each other, and they talked to the community, and they were connected. Later on, when the car starts to become introduced, the police station is kind of a call box that you can see here. We actually did an extensive study of police stations and policies. This was a massive diagram that we made. But we really noticed that the introduction of the car is where it started to really separate the police in their police station from the surrounding neighborhood. So they become a fortress that is surrounded by a gigantic parking lot, very hard to access. So we look specifically at this police station in North Lawndale. It's a community where the people are afraid of the police, and they're afraid to go anywhere near the police station, even to report a crime. But you see the blue area and the road in front of it. The police station is really sitting by itself away from the neighborhood. And so nowadays, the police that work here live far away, and they come and drive to the police station and then work. They don't really know the community. So what we thought we could do is, as architects, like make a convening of both the police and the community members and ask them what they thought the future police station could be. And so this was a meeting that we were able to arrange with police coming, community members coming, and our team facilitating the conversation about what the future police station could be. And it was really interesting is that talking about design really diffused the tension between these groups because they wanted to talk about design. They wanted to change their environment. And then the result of these conversations was this kind of weird building, that civic building with computer spaces and a community room where, and even someone brought up the idea of having a barbershop in the police station, because if you have a barbershop, you are really going to create a relationship with the police. They need a barbershop, and you need a barbershop. So it was really interesting. So the idea is that the police station would go from a fortress to really being a more open building on the public side of the building. And we took these ideas out to the neighborhood as well, because there were lots of ideas about the space around the station. And one of the things that everybody said they wanted was a place to have sports. And it seemed like an obvious idea to have use some of this extra parking as a sports court. We found out that it would cost about $40,000, I think, to put in a half court. And we were able to raise the money in no time at all, because people are looking for these solutions. And we were able to install a half court on the police station parking lot, which at first people were like, wow, this is really weird, because the police don't want us here and we don't want to be there. But everyone started using it immediately. The following year, we interviewed everyone to try to follow up, and we found that parents said that they want their kids to play at the police station now. They feel safer than other courts around. The police now even have basketballs inside that kids can borrow. So it's a very small step, but we thought this is what design can start to do for communities. This is where we have to use our design mind. You know, maybe it's not a building, but it's thinking about connecting all these dots. And so maybe in the future, you can go to the police station and get some other city services, or get money out of an ATM, or have a birthday party, and all the while having these interactions between the two groups that are not the tense interactions of arrest, but everyday interactions that would hopefully improve this relationship between the people and their environment. With that, I thank you very much and take your questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Jeanne Gang. Thank you so much. Et donc, Jeanne Gang attend vos questions que vous pouvez poser en français ou en anglais.
Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Vielen Dank, Jeanne Gang. Und jetzt ist Zeit für Fragen, die Sie stellen können auf Französisch oder auf Englisch. Und wir haben Mikrofons im Saal. Also
Nous avons 2 hôtesses dans les salles qui peuvent poser des questions. La première question, allez-y.
Good evening, Jeanne. I'm here, right here.
Oh.
First of all, thank you very much for being here tonight, and thanks for your conference. It was very inspiring for many people here, especially for the young crowd. There are a lot of students here, and I guess your work is very tremendous work. I guess you've been around here for a while, maybe a couple of days, and you've been touring Strasbourg. Maybe you've got some time to visit it, and maybe you've realized that Strasbourg is currently working on the link between the city and the water as Chicago, and congrats to Emmanuel Ram, because he is very ambitious, and I guess your freedom is based on his ambition. And we are trying to reinvent, as Chicago did, the link between the city and the water. And Strasbourg was built on water, is surrounded by water, and is built along the river. And so we are now building on a very big scale between the Rhine River and the downtown, historical downtown. So what would be your recommendation to our mayor, to our politicians, what they should be doing and trying to reinvent that link between the water and the city?
Okay, just to summarize your question, you're talking about all the projects that are going on around the river today in Strasbourg, and what would be suggestions to help strengthen the connection between the city and the river and the uses. Thanks for your question. I think what I've started to see in Strasbourg this new vibrancy beginning around the river, and I think that's a great sign. And I think that one of the things that you probably have already done as a citizenry is to look at what the upriver and downriver conditions are around this, because the river is not just the river in Strasbourg, it connects to other places. So that's like a necessary step to reimagining the river. And the other thing I would say is that this first step of bringing people to the river is the most important one, and to providing the architectural infrastructure to enable people to use the river in ways that they didn't before. And so I think I already see that starting to happen as well. But that's really the key thing, to begin building a constituency for the river. And it will be strong. It will be very strong as soon as people can start to use it in ways that they haven't been allowed to use it in the past. And then third, it would be, remembering that it's not just human use that is important, because in cities, as our footprints of cities grows bigger and bigger, it's harder for a biodiverse nature to exist going around the city. We have to actually bring it right through the middle. And so understanding what to do to the river, to the river's edge, to the plantings, to make it a place that that all the species will be able to come and use, is a huge project that I think a lot of European cities will need to do moving forward.
We have a lot less coyotes and skunks over here.
Less coyotes and skunks. Certain animals are presenting themselves as potential urban animals, and the larger the mammal, the more healthy the ecosystem that you have. So don't stop at squirrels. Thank you.
Est-ce qu'il y a une autre question?
Gibt es sonst noch eine Frage?
Thank you very much for your lecture, Jeanne. I liked very much your definition of the house as an active, nearly being. And I think the most contrary thing we have and study in Germany and in Europe overall is the passive house. We have to activate houses. And so that's for me a message to define it even by the action of people and not only by the given things in physical nature of buildings.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
It's just a statement.
Okay.
Encore une question? Ou... Ah, là-bas.
Hello, and thank you very much for this presentation. And in the idea of continuing this dialogue, we'd like maybe to continue it between these continents in a certain way. And a lot of the American architecture has focused in the last 20 years on public space, and many ideas have come in from many European concepts and so on. But for us, there are many students and young architects as well. What can Europe now learn from America and how it has tackled its own urban specificities? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I've thought a lot about the question was like, how can Europe learn from anything America is doing in their cities, and what can the exchange be between the two? I think American cities have been learning from European cities for a long time, and so that continues because European cities continue to change and grow. One thing that I think I see more in the American cities is, and maybe it's possible because there is more space in the infrastructure, is the conversion of infrastructure to natural ways through the city, to public spaces through the city, and that's been and really focusing on the biodiversity of these spaces. For example, the width of the roads, because American cities were built later, the width of the roads is much wider, which is great because that means you can take that width back and introduce a lot of more pedestrian-oriented, bike-oriented, and biodiverse-oriented ways. And one thing that's really becoming important in American cities, and I see starting to happen, is that considering, let's just say, street trees, instead of thinking of them as individual trees that are planted in individual spaces, there's now much more thinking about how to create a completely connected underneath these trees, so it really becomes a landscape that can absorb water, as we said in the very beginning, that the more the infrastructure is taxed by heavy rains through climate change, we have to do everything we can with our nature to help absorb it, to help resist and be resilient. So there are a number of new projects happening right now where the plantings through the urban spaces are thought of as completely continuous underground spaces that allow the trees to get much bigger and absorb more water. So I think those opportunities for creating porosity in our cities, that's a huge thing. That's a project going on in the States that I think could be useful for you as well. Philadelphia is a city that's really done a lot of work in this area.
Thank you very much.
On a une autre question là-bas.
Hello. I have a question regarding the relationship of form and architecture, specifically about the first project that you presented later, the boathouse, because you mentioned that the form of the house is actually a representation of the paddling, the movement of paddling. Well, I'm just actually fresh out of the ivory tower, so, well, as a former student, well, it is almost obscene to think that to start with a specific form, you know, because we are saying here, like, start from the inside of the architecture and then you will find your form. However, what you explained later is kind of the reverse. Well, so it's just my question: is this form that you is it from the beginning that the form has been somehow fixed or thought about, or it comes along the way, or it is more of a result? Anyway,
it's a good question. He's asking about at what point in the design process does the form enter? You know, is it the beginning? Is it the middle? Is it the end? And it's a very good question. And architecture does have form, so it is important to work with form. But in our practice, we tend to begin the process with research, and we begin with talking to people, and we have a very specific method of engaging the users of the building. So those are things that are like activities that really start the process. For the boathouse, we knew that we needed to announce this boathouse because people did not know they could actually go to the water and use it. And so that's where architecture, the form of architecture, can be very powerful. You see this exciting, dynamic shape and of a roof that is functional too, and it draws people in. Similar to the other project, which I showed, the pavilion at the Nature Boardwalk. Like, you know, just putting a box on the site would not have had the same effect. So this is where is exactly the combination of architecture's power is in its ability to make people stop or go out of their way to go see a building. You know, I do that all the time. The form is important. In our work, we usually we try to delay it as long as possible, and oftentimes we'll start with the material first. So is it concrete? Is it wood? Is it steel? Maybe that comes from my background and training at IIT or former work at the ETH in Zurich. But I always look for the material first. But in the process of research, we try to delay the form making, and then the form making is informed by that research and process. So with the boathouse, yes, it came about as we started to discover what is rowing. You know, it's motion. It's about movement. And of course, Muybridge, you know, his photographs came up because he was really into the stopgap photographs of motion, and so that's how it started, and it evolved into what it was. So I think that we can't let form go. It is very important, and it has to be something that people want to be around. I don't know how else to describe it, but there is a quality that is so attractive about architecture that draws people to it. And we don't want to give that up. It's very key. Thank you. Does that help?
Je pense que on va pouvoir conclure sur cette question et cette belle réponse. Thank you so much, Jeanne Gang. Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.